All right, Shabbos, good morning, good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for our shir this morning, our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Iyar, Steve and Terry Zinn, in honor of their grandson, Matan Shmuel Aaron. We hope that on the merit of our Talmud Torah, young men will grow to be an incredible Ben Torah Me'eve Esim Shanim Tovos. To thank our Week of Learning sponsors, Haley and Ari Lichterman, dedicating the shiurim this week in memory of Haley's mother, Rachel Leah Bas Ruvain Meir Zichron Levracha. To thank our Yomi sponsors for today, Bernard and Varda Birnbaum, ignition of the year site of Bernard's grandmother, Mrs. Mali Shafman, Miriam Bas Yisrael Pinchas. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. Now, we'll say with that, let us begin. A lot to do today. Actually, really not so much to do today. A little bit of a very fascinating daf. So we'll say we are picking up today's daf is Chavtes 29. We are picking up on Chavtes Mabeis 28b, and we are picking up of Rabbi Shmuel. This is where we left off, 3 lines up from the bottom. So remember again, just to reference our conversation back on Chav Ches Amud Aleph. So our sugya at the bottom of Chav Ches 28a began with the following. The pasuk by Sotah says Nitma'a, Nitma'a, Nitma'a 3 times. Rabbi Akiva Darshan wanted to teach us that the Sotah is prohibited to her husband, Baal. Second, Sotah is prohibited to Boel, adulterer. Third, Sotah is prohibited to consume truma. Fine. That was Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shmuel then made a kal v'chomer. What was Rabbi Shmuel's kal v'chomer? Rabbi Shmuel said, a grusha, right, a divorcee, which would be the case of a bas Kohen who married Israel, then she gets divorced from her husband with no children. She can go back to her father's home and eat truma. So a grusha who's permitted to eat truma, but yet is prohibited to marry into the kahuna. So to again, this Sotah who is prohibited to eat truma certainly can't marry into the kahuna. Okay, now we'll say, now let's pick up with our Gemara. Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Akiva truma. Rabbi Shmuel, I don't understand. What are you talking about? Rabbi Akiva is talking about the prohibition of a Sotah to eat truma. And why do you respond with a discussion about her marrying into the kahuna? To which the Gemara says, so first, that's question number 1. Rabbi Shmuel, I don't understand. Rabbi, again, you're talking about a different topic. Rabbi Akiva is talking about truma consumption, and suddenly you brought up a kal v'chomer about marrying into the kahuna. I don't understand what you're responding to. Furthermore, Vesu, Rabbi Akiva kahuna minale. Where does Rabbi Akiva learn that a Sotah is not allowed to marry a Kohen? So, by the way, what's the case of a Sotah marrying a Kohen? Reuven is married to Rachel, warns her not to be alone with Shimon. She violates the warning. They're going up to the Beis HaMikdash. They're on the way. On the way to the Beis HaMikdash, Reuven dies. So now Rabbi Shmuel was saying that halacha l'maisa, so Rachel can't marry a Kohen. Now remember, under normal circumstances, would she be able to marry a Kohen? Yes. Why? She is a almana, right? That's fine, except for a Kohen Gadol. But she can marry a regular Kohen. Now she can't even marry a Kohen. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Akiva, from where do you learn that she can't marry a Kohen? So maybe you'll say Rabbi Akiva says, you don't need a pasuk to teach you that a Sotah can't marry a Kohen. That's obvious. Type of Chavtes. Share asaba safek zona kizona. We'll say, remember again, essentially, a Sotah is treated like a zona. It's treated like a zona. A zona is not permitted to go ahead and marry a Kohen. Take a look. Actually, before we go on, if that's the case, that according to Rabbi Akiva, it's obvious that a Sotah can't marry a Kohen because a Sotah is a zona, and a Kohen is not permitted to marry a zona. Then the truth is you shouldn't need a pasuk for truma either. Why? Shahari asaba safek zona kizona. Because there was the same thing with truma. Because at the end there was say, the whole chap. Remember again, the whole chap of Sotah is asaba safek kivadai. Right? That's the chap. Remember again, we don't know if what the Sotah did or what she didn't. But the whole way that the Torah treats her status, although she's a safek, the Torah treats her as a vadai. The Torah treats her as someone who has definitively gone ahead and committed adultery. So if you're not going to need a pasuk to teach you that she can't marry a Kohen, then the truth is you shouldn't need a pasuk to what? To teach you that she can't eat truma. In other words, both of those things should be equally prohibited. Fine. To which the Gemara says, by the way, the Rashi, we don't have to get into the Rashi. El Rabbi Akiva, Arba Kroik Sivir. Let's listen to this. It's very interesting. According to Rabbi Akiva, there are in fact 4 psukim available for darshaning. Now, what are the 4 psukim? I will say, now look at Rashi for just a moment. El Rabbi Akiva, Arba Kroik Sivi, Yiseri Beis Nitma, V'chad V'nitma. So I will say, so remember again. Now watch this. According to Rabbi Akiva, remember, the Torah says Nitma 3 times. 2 times it's Nitma, 1 time it is V'nitma. If you darshan vavs, that gives you 4 drashas, right? Each nitma is like 2. Is like 1. V'nitma, the vav is 1, and nitma is 1. So therefore, Rabbi Akiva ultimately has 4 phrases, 4 nitmas available for drashas. What is the of them for? Well, so here we go. Chad labal, 1 to teach that the soul is prohibited to her husband. Chad labal, 1 to teach that she is prohibited to the adulterer. V'chad lekahuna, 1 to teach me that she is asura to the kahuna. V'chad letruma, and 1 to teach me that she is asura to truma. Incredible, asura to truma. Fine. Rabbi Shmuel will say, Tlasa Kraik Sivi. Rabbi Shmuel on the other hand will say, here we go. Now we're going to explain the exchange. Rabbi Shmuel says, in reality, there's only 3 nitmas. Rabbi Shmuel doesn't darshan vavs. So there's 3 nitmas in the parasha of Sotah. Chad lebal, 1 to teach that she's asura to her husband. V'chad leboel, 1 to the adulterer. V'chad letruma, and 1 for truma. Ukahuna asya b'kal v'chomer. Now I will say, so now I get it. Okay. And Rabbi Shmuel learns out the Isser of Kahuna from a Kal V'chomer. I will say, that's what Rabbi Shmuel was saying on Amud Aleph, right? That's what Rabbi Shmuel was saying when Rabbi Shmuel said, Grusha, who is permitted to go ahead and eat Truma, yet is prohibited to the Kahuna. So Sotah, who's not permitted to eat Truma, clearly is not permitted to the Kahuna. That's what Rabbi Shmuel was saying back to Rabbi Akiva. So I'm going to say, let's go back now. So now what we have is as follows. The machlokes Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Shmuel is not really a machlokes in halacha. Rabbi said, I just want to be clear. Everyone is agreeing on the same 4 things, which is a sotah is prohibited to her husband, Baal, the adulterer, Boel, to consume truma and to marry a Kohen. Everyone agrees on those 4 things. The machlokes is how you learn it out. Rabbi Akiva darshans vavs. Therefore, he has 4 nitmas. Therefore, again, 1 for Baal, 1 for Boel, 1 for Truma, 1 for Kohen. Rabbi Shmuel doesn't darshan vavs. Therefore, what? He only has 3 nitmas. What does he use his 3 nitmas for? Baal, Boel, Truma, and Kahuna. He learns out from a Kal V'chomer. Right? Incredible. Rabbi Shmuel. So now Gemara asks Rabbi Shmuel, how do you know that ultimately, again, the pasuk is used to exclude truma, that she can't eat truma, and her issur to the kahuna is learned out from a kal v'chomer. Dilma ki itztirich lekahuna. Maybe the pasuk is used for kahuna u'truma sharia, and maybe truma should be permitted. In other words, maybe she's muteres to eat truma. Amr Lecha, Rabbi Shmuel will say, Mistabra dumya debal uboel. So Rabbi Shmuel will say, it makes sense that the 3rd thing, because remember there are 3 nitmas, it makes sense that the 3rd thing should be something which resembles the previous 2. Namely what? Ma bal ubal mechayim, just like the prohibition ultimately on the husband and the adulterer, ultimately again is when they are alive, af truma name mechayim. So too, ultimately what? So too, truma is also something that applies ultimately again during lifetime. La fuke kahuna de la achar misa. Remember again, the isser for her to marry a Kohen only applies when? When the husband is alive, right? La maisa again. La fuke misa kahuna de la achar misa. The prohibition for her to marry a Kohen is obviously only once her husband is dead. Right, so because when her husband's alive, she can't marry anyone else. So just like the first 2 prohibitions apply during the lifetime of the husband, the 3rd prohibition should also be something that applies during the lifetime of the husband, which would be truma, because the prohibition to marry into the kahuna obviously only applies after the husband is dead. Okay, incredible. Good. So the Gemara says this as Rabbi Akiva will say, Tumya debal uboa lesser. Rabbi Kiva doesn't hold that the third thing has to be something that resembles the previous two. V'inami, furthermore, he could say, it's like, no, he would agree to that idea. So we have this concept that even sometimes something which could have been learned out from a Kal V'chomer, still the Torah will go out of its way to learn it out through a pasuk. Fine. So I'll say, so bottom line is, halacha l'maisa, everyone is agreeing on the 4 prohibitions of a sotah. Baal, Boel, Truma, Kahuna. Right? The machlokes just is how you learn it out. Rabbi Akiva, darshaning vavs, he effectively has 4 v'nitmas. Rabbi Shmuel doesn't darshan vavs, only has 3 nitmas, and has to learn out the Isser Kahuna from a Kal V'chomer. Incredible. Amrav Gidal Amarav, Davar sheyesh bo das lishal, ve'in bo das. I'm sorry. Amrav Gidal Amarav, Davar sheyesh bo das lishal. Ve'ein bo das lishval mehai kranafka. So we'll say, so remember again, now we're going back a little bit. If you remember again, one of the major things we walked away from yesterday's daf with was this concept of a paradigm for tumah. And what's the paradigm? The only time that a suffix tumah is tameh is when yesh bo das lishoel, when it has the ability ultimately again to converse, to be asked about the circumstances. Namely, in other words, that's another way of saying that the concept of suffix tumah only applies to people. People. In other words, we'll say any suffix tumah you will have by inanimate objects is always resolved leniently, always resolved l'kula. The only time that a suffix tumah has the ability to become tameh. Now, obviously, you need another criteria. What's the other criteria? Ultimately, Rishas HaYachid, right? But Lamaisa, the only time that Yesh Bo Das Lishael ultimately again has halacha Lamaisa is a suffix tumah is in a situation of Yesh Bo Das Lishael, a person. So the Gemara says, one second, are we learning this out from Sotah? Is Sotah the makar for this? The Gemara says, here we go. So the Gemara says, Amrav Gila Amarav, did we learn out from Sotah? So we'll say, I thought we learned that from the Bible. Listen to this. We'll say, so if you have sacrificial meat that went ahead and touched something tameh, you can't eat it. Right? The sacrificial, okay, the straightforward pasuk, right? Basar, sacrificial meat, kodesh meat, that comes in contact with something that is tameh, cannot be consumed. They're both saying, now, what do you learn from here? So you learn from here, Vadai tamehu de lo yochal. It's only if you know that the sacrificial meat definitely touched something tameh. Ha-safek tameh, v'safek tar, yochal. Pietra will say what? Something that is safek, right? If the sacrificial meat potentially touched something that was tameh. In other words, we'll say that's one of 2 cases. Either maybe it did or maybe it didn't touch something that was tameh, or maybe it touched something, but you're not sure if that item is safek tameh, safek tar. Either way, if it's only a safek, whether or not the sacrificial meat came in contact with something tameh, ultimately again, it's tar. You're permitted to eat it. Yeah, we'll say, look at the sefer, look at the end of that pasuk. V'habasar kol tahar yochal. Here I will say, the pasuk says, the basar of a carbon, kol tahar, if it's tar, you're permitted to eat it. What do you see from there? Vadai tar hu yochal. I can infer from that, it's only if it's definitively tar that you have the ability to eat it. Yochal basar has safek tameh. But it sounds like over there from the second part of the pasuk that if it's safek, you will not be permitted to eat it. So the Gemara says, v'safek tar lo yochal. Elav shmamina. So we'll say, what do you have to say? Shmamina kan sheyesh bo das lishael, kan she'ein bo das lishael. We'll say, mostly at the pasuk is talking about 2 different cases. One case is talking about a situation of yesh bo das lishael, where there is a person involved. And because there's a person involved, therefore, again, I will say a suffix tumah, when there's yesh bo das lishael, will be dealt with stringently. Masha'enke, when it's in bo das lishael, just a piece of meat, not a person involved, that will be resolved leniently. So I will say, so the point over here is, it sounds like we learn out the concept of yesh bo das lishael, ein bo das lishael, from this pasuk about karbanos, not from Sotah. So what's going on over here? To which the Gemara essentially answers, it's both. We learn out the concept from both because learning it out from one without the other would open us up to certain questions. I have to learn out the concept of yesh bo or in bo das lishal from Karban, that's Rav Gidel, and I have to learn from Sotah. Why don't I need both? Watch this. The imid Rav, because if it would have just been from Rav, namely the case of Karban, Hava amina bein b'rshaseicha bein b'rshasarabim is bein b'rshasarabim. Rabbi say, listen to this. I would have thought from the case of Karban, Rabbi say, if you notice, by the way, the Karban case makes no distinction between where the suffix arose, right? So from the Karban case, I would have thought that if it's yesh bodas lishal, that it's tamei, whether the suffix was in rishus hayochid or rishus harabim. Therefore, it's tzirich lemigmar me Sotah. Therefore, I need Sotah. Because we'll say, what does Sotah teach me? Sotah teaches me that the only time that yesh bodas lishal, suffix tamei, is when it's in rishus hayochid. That's what Sotah adds to the picture. V'imi Sotah, and if we're just learning that from Sotah, havamina adiika das nogea umagia. Rabbi says, interesting. In the case of Sotah, there is yesh bodas lishal. And there's yesh bodas lishal on whose part? Right? By who? By all of the parties involved. So from Sotah, I might have thought that yesh bodas lishal means all the parties involved ultimately, again, have das. But if only one of the parties, right? So therefore I will say, but again, what does Karban teach me? Karban teaches me that no, all you need is what? One of the parties involved ultimately to have das lishal. So we'll say, if we bring this all together, the principle that we established yesterday remains unchanged. I will say one of the most important principles in Tumah. Suffix Tumah. Say you have a case of doubtful Tumah. How do you resolve a case of suffix Tumah? So there are two things I'm looking for. I will say, what am I looking for? Das lishal and geography. Right? Das lishal and geography. Those are the two things that play a role. So I will say, so first of all, again, if the suffix Tumah occurs in Rosh Hashanah, then no matter what, tar. Right? So anytime you have a suffix Tumah Rosh Hashanah, it's always going to be tar. The only question that comes up is a suffix Tumah in a private setting, in a private domain, in Rosh Hashanah. How do you deal with that? Then it comes down to one simple criteria. Yesh bodas lishal, ein bodas lishal. Are there people involved in this? If it's a suffix Tumah regarding people in Rosh Hashanah, tamei. If it's a suffix Tumah regarding inanimate objects, which is another way of saying ein bodas lishal, you can't ask them what happened, then ultimately, again, it will be tahar. What's the source for this? It turns out that there's really two sources for this. One of them is Sotah, and the second one is Karbanos. And the truth is, I kind of need them both. And really what's interesting is, I need them both because if I was just learning out from Sotah, I might have thought that yesh bodas lishal means everyone involved. Right? Everyone involved has das. Kamash Shmuel from Karban, I don't need everyone involved. I just need what? One of the parties involved to have das. Incredible. I will say, so this is a really, really, really important principle in the halachos of Tumah. Good, let's go weiter. So I'll say, so remember again, that day that they opened up the Beis Medrash, Rabbi Akiva darshaned about a kli cheres. I will say, remember again, what was Rabbi Akiva's drasha? So Rabbi Akiva's drasha was about the following situation. I'll read to you from the Mishnah. Kli cheres asher yipal mehem el tocho, kol asher besocho yitma. Eno omer tame el yitma, the tame achirim limeid al kikar sheni, shematame sashlishi. I will say, here was Rabbi Akiva's drasha. Here you go. You have, imagine for a moment, you have an earthenware oven. Good, right? In that oven, there is a loaf of bread that is baking. A dead sheretz falls into that oven, or a piece of a mace falls into whatever, it doesn't matter. We'll say, what's the halacha? What's the halacha? Oven becomes a rishon, right? First degree tumah. Oven then makes the loaf of bread a sheni, second degree tumah. Rabbi Akiva darshaned that ultimately what? The bread has the ability, if it comes in contact with something else, to go ahead and make the something else a shlishi. That is what Rabbi Akiva darshan. I will say, now where did Rabbi Akiva darshan from Pasuk? Ukli cheres asher yipal mem mesocho. You have something tummy that falls into an earthenware vessel. In this case, it's the oven. Kol asher besocho yitma. everything in it, yitma. Rabbi say, what does yitma mean? Yitma, Rabbi Akiva Dashins means can convey tuma. Not only does itself become tameh, but can convey tuma. Limeid al kikar sheni shias shlishi. Therefore, again, the loaf which becomes a sheni, ultimately again then can make a shlishi. That's the drush of Rabbi Akiva. Now, both say the second part to this is Rabbi Yeshua says, "Oh, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, if only you were here to see this, because you said, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, you said that a future generation will make a shlishi tahar. Why? Because there is no pasuk to teach you about a shlishi." Okay, that's the story in the Mishnah. Let's go to the Gemara now. Here we go. So I don't understand. If there is no pasuk that says that a shlishi is tameh, right? If there's no makar, if there's no source, that ultimately, again, that halacha l'maisa, that a sheni can make a shlishi, then why are we inventing new categories of tumah? Right? I was going to say, the Mishnah itself is strange, because Rabbi Akiva is darshaning a pasuk, and that Rabbi Yoshua came along and said, "Oh, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, if only you were here to see this. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, your entire career, you said that one day people are going to mistakenly think that a shlishi is tahar, because there is no pasuk in the Torah which supports the category of shlishi." So Gemara says, I understand. If there's no pasuk in the Torah to support the category of shlishi, then why do we say that shlishi is tameh? Why are we inventing new categories of tumah that are not necessary? Rav Yehuda Marav, min haTorah ein lo midin kal v'chomer yesh lo. Because also shlishi is one of these things that you're right. There's not a pasuk, although Rabbi Akiva seems to bring a pasuk. There's not a pasuk that ultimately supports the concept of shlishi, but you could arrive at the concept of shlishi from kal v'chomer. How so? Listen to this. Umat tvul yom shemuter b'chulin pasal b'truma. We'll say tvul yom. We'll say who's a tvul? It's very exciting. Tuman Tara doesn't get enough credit. Tuman Tara is ridiculously exciting. So listen to this. We'll say why is Tuman Tara exciting? I'm going to tell you why too, because it sounds like some of you need convincing. And I would say Tuman Tara, because you know what the entire discussion of Tuman Tara teaches you? That something that is tameh could be made tahar. I'll say, what more invigorating statement is there in life? That something that is impure could be rectified and made pure. That statement by itself makes me the happiest man in the world. Because at any given moment in life, I am ridiculously tameh. And the fact that no matter how tameh I become, I could be made tahar, that's the best news in the world. So give me tuman tara all day, every day. Be the happiest man. Let's say that's what we're learning. Anything that's tameh could be made tahar. That statement, that's a bumper sticker. Anything that is tameh can be made tahar. Ein simcha gidola mizo. With that, let's dive back in with renewed excitement and energy. Let's say, here we go. Ma tvul yom. So let's say, who's a tvul yom? Tvul yom is a guy who went to the mikvah and is waiting for harav shemesh. Remember again, so he's going to the mikvah, but he's not going to be tar until nightfall. Now, I just want to point out, sometimes with the tvul yom, even nightfall is not enough, because you could have a type of tumah that also requires karbanos. So you could be a tvul yom who is mechusar kippurim, right? Which means, again, you're missing nightfall, but you're also missing the offering of your karbanos. But okay, let's take it one step at a time. Here we go. Ma tvul yom shemutar b'chulin. That will say tvul yom after he goes to the mikvah. He could eat chulin. Right, he goes to the mikvah, right? It's Thursday. He goes to the mikvah at 8 o'clock in the morning, which is fine. He still has to wait for nightfall to become totally tar. So he could eat chulin, yet posel b'truma. Now remember again, posel b'truma means if that tvul yom touches truma, right, he renders that truma unfit. What I want to point out is, there's two different lashonos here, a lot to do. Shouldn't have gone so long in Achov's Lavav. Sorry. So we'll say, now listen to this. Too much to do, too little time. So we'll say, now listen to this. There's a lashon of posel and a lashon of tameh. When something becomes tameh usually means you are tameh and have the ability to convey tumah. Posel means you're tameh, but it's a dead end. You cannot convey any more tumah. If a tvul yom touches truma, he makes truma tameh, but he can't convey truma. That's why the lashon over here is Tvul Yom Shemuter B'Chulin post Sal B'Truma. Puzzle, right? Kikar Sheni, we'll say yet. Kikar Sheni, remember again, what's a Kikar Sheni? That's like our case that we had in the Mishnah, right? You have a loaf of bread baking in an oven, sheretz falls into the oven becomes a rishon, bread becomes a sheni. That's called the Kikar Sheni. Kikar Sheni, Shepasal B'Chulin, Eino Din Shiyas Shlishi B'Truma. They both say a Kikar Sheni ultimately has the ability to make chulin, right, to go ahead and negatively impact chulin, should certainly be able to make a shlishi in truma. So that's the kal v'chomer. Rabbi say a tvul yom who's permitted to go ahead and eat chulin, yet could go ahead and pasel truma. So therefore, again, a kikar sheni, right, a second degree tuma loaf, which Rabbi say has the ability to negatively impact chulin, should certainly make a shlishi by truma. That's the kal v'chomer. We'll say that's the kal v'chomer to make the case for a shlishi. For a shlishi, ikal mifrach. I could ask a pircha on that. Ma'ala tvul yom shekein avatuma. So I will say here's the difference. The tvul yom himself was an avatuma, right? He was the very source of tuma, right? So ultimately, again, therefore I will say, as opposed to the kikar, where the kikar is only a sheni. Right, the kikar itself is only secondary tumah. I will say, who's the tvul yom? The tvul yom is the guy who contracted tumah directly from the source. That's what it means when it says that he's an av. So his power should be stronger ultimately again than a kikar. That's a sheni. So you're right. The Gemara says you're right. TC amabez TC mitvul yom the sheretz. So I will say I can bring this up from the case of a tvul yom of sheretz. So I will say ultimately again, so I will say a tvul yom of a sheretz is not a case of an avatuma. I will say a person who contracts tumas sheretz is not a case of an av. So this case will be a guy of a tvul yom who's not an av, but ma'ala tvul yom the sheretz shekim b'mino avatuma. So we'll say, but yet again, you're right. But lamaisa, even in a case of tvul yom the sheretz, then we'll say what we'll say is bimino. We'll say, by the way, Rashi's on both sides of this page. You know you're in trouble when Rashi's on both sides of the page. We'll say, take a look at Rashi on the right side of the page, right across. First of all, take a look at Rashi, tvul yom b'sheretz. Adam shenaga b'sheretz rishon l'tuma. We'll say, if a person touches a sheretz, he becomes a rishon, right? Velo av hatuma, and he's not an av. So we'll say, so maybe the case that we're talking about over here is a case of a tvul yom from tumas sheretz. Because in that case, I will say, he's not an av. He's not an av. But we'll say, see, generally, let's say, for example, a person touches a corpse. Person touches a corpse, he becomes an avatuma. An avatuma. But so therefore, again, I will say, the Gemara was saying, you can't make a kal v'chomer between a tvul yom and a kikar sheni, because essentially a kikar sheni is considered to be derivative tuma, versus a person who's considered to be primary tuma. To which the Gemara says, no. So let's bring down the case of tvul yom, the sheretz. Because when a person touches the sheretz, Rabbi say, he's not an av. He's not an av. He starts off ultimately again as a rishon. That's also derivative tumah. And yet, despite that, he won't impact chulin, but does impact truma. To which the Gemara says, still, malat tvul yom the sheretz shekim aminu avatuma. I will say, take a look at Rashi. Shekim yesh aminu avatuma im hayon nagia klize o adam ze b'meis naasa av l'tamemer. We'll say, you're right. In this particular case, so the guy in question only touched the sheretz, but a person is capable of becoming an av hatuma. Person is capable. They both say this stands in contradistinction to food items which are never capable of becoming an av hatuma. It's actually a very important distinction. They both say if you take a loaf of bread and put it on top of a dead body, right? What is that loaf of bread, right? So let's take a step back. If a person touches a corpse, they both say, what is he? What is he? An avatuma. It's very important. A corpse is avi avos hatuma, right? The mothership of tuma. You touch a corpse, ultimately, again, you're an av. You're an avatuma. You're an avatuma. Now let's say if you go ahead and you place a loaf on top of a corpse, that loaf is not an av. That's what Rashi says over here. He says, so we'll say ultimately again, food items can never become an av. Therefore, we'll say what the Gemara is just suggesting over here is the kal v'chomer is flawed. Kal v'chomer is flawed. Why is the kal v'chomer flawed? You can't make a kal v'chomer between people and food items because a person is capable of becoming an av when a food item is never capable of becoming an av. Fine. To which the Gemara says, Malik licheres shekein ma'aviro mitame. So we'll say, so ultimately, but on the other hand, klicheres is also different. Why? Because klicheres has the ability to become tame even without contact. How? Through airspace. Through airspace. To which the Gemara says, Tvul Yom Yochiach. But Tvul Yom has its own chumrah. So we'll say, so we're locked in a little bit of a cycle. So what do we see from the cycle? We'll say, so rather we say, the Chazra Adin is to keep going in circles. Lo ra'izeh k'ra'izeh, v'lo ra'izeh k'ra'izeh. In reality, ultimately, again, these items are very dissimilar. So what is the tzara shava? What is the common denominator? Shemutarin b'chulin. Ultimately, again, they are permitted, ultimately in chulin. Upostin b'truma. But ultimately, again, invalidate truma. Kol shekein kikar sheni sheposa b'chulin deposa b'truma. So I'll say all the more so. So both Adam and Kalim, right? Ultimately, the common denominator is that they are mutar b'chulin and pasal truma. All the more so, kikar sheni, a second degree tuma loaf, which is pasal b'chulin, which is pasal. In other words, not pasal b'chulin. It pasals chulin. Ultimately, again, it should pasal truma. Okay. So the Gemara says. So I'll say. So bottom line. Remember again. Let's just keep track of what we're doing over here. In the Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva advanced the argument that a kikar sheni has the ability to make a shlishi. Fine. Now let's say all the Gemara is saying over here, and then the Mishnah said that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said ultimately future generations will come to be metaher a shlishi. Why? Because halacha l'maaseh said there's no pasuk. Remember again, the Gemara said, well, if there's no pasuk, then why would a sheni loaf make something a shlishi? To which the Gemara answered, it was a kavachomer. And we'll say now you have the kavachomer. Or it really was a tzara shava. Was the kavachomer? Fine. Vidar sha'achar parach, vidar achar. So we'll say now Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said a future generation would try to be metahar shlishi. Why? What would be the future generation? What would they say? Vidar achar parach, ma'ala tzara shava shebahen. Maybe the common denominator between tvul yom and kli cheres is sheken yesh po and sad chomer. Rabbi will say both of them what? Both of them have a unique chumrah. And that's the pircha. So in other words, you can't make a kavachomer that includes tvul yom and kli cheres and extrapolate to kikar sheni, because both tvul yom and kli cheres have their own unique chumras, which prevent them from serving as a paradigm to anything else. And therefore, a future generation would say the kavachomer is flawed, and therefore what? A sheni should not be able to make something a shlishi. So Tanya, Rabbi Yossi. So we'll say, so therefore again, that's what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was afraid of. But essentially, remember, what Rabbi Akiva did was something amazing. Rabbi will say, what did Rabbi Akiva effectively do? Rabbi Akiva said, guys, it's not a kavachomer, it's a pasuk. It's a pasuk. The ability for a sheni to make something a shlishi is a pasuk. What's the pasuk? I will say it's the pasuk we mentioned in the Mishnah. The pasuk was, Ukli cheres asher yipol mehem el tocho, kol asher besocho yitma. Again, that which is in the oven, in the kli cheres, i.e. the loaf of bread, which is a sheni, yitma, has the ability to make something else tameh. So Rabbi Akiva removed the whole thing from a discussion about a kavachomer and ultimately made it into a pasuk. Incredible. So Tanya, Rabbi Yossi, minayin the Rabbi b'kodesh shapasel. I will say, how do we know that a Rabbi b'kodesh? I will say, now watch this. There's another principle. The other principle is, the holier something is, the more sensitive it is to tumah. So for example, I will say, in general, shlishi is going to be like the last level of tumah an item could reach. In other words, once you become a shlishi, what's your status? Pasul, right? In other words, you yourself are tameh. When I say yourself, I'm talking about an object. Object is tameh, but the say can't convey tumah to anything else, with one exception: kodesh. Let's say kodesh are sacrificial items. Kodesh could even become a revi. Minayin the revi b'kodesh shapasul. Let's say, how do I know that something could become a revi in kodesh? But the Revi itself is possible. In other words, it can become a Revi, but from a Revi you can't make anything else tameh. V'dinhu ma mechosar kippurim shemutar b'truma pasal b'kodesh. So we'll say, guys, mechosar kippurim. We saw this before. It's mechosar kippurim. Mechosar kippurim is the guy who, remember again, went to the mikvah, right? Even had hair of shemesh, but still has to bring karbanos in order to fully affect his tara. Right, Rabbi say again, this could be, Rashi says over here, this is, for example, Zav, Zava, Yoledes, Mitzora. All of these cases require karbanos. So watch this. He's permitted to eat truma, pasal b'kodesh, yet he's not allowed to eat karbanos. And if he does so, he can make them unfit. Shlishi shepasal b'truma, a shlishi which makes truma unfit. Ein of din shiyah sen a revi b'kodesh, could certainly make a revi in kodesh. That's the kavachomer. V'lamadnu shlishi l'kodesh min haTorah. Turns out that we learn out a shlishi for kodesh min haTorah. That's the pasuk of Rabbi Akiva, or revi'i mikavachomer, and the revi'i is learned out from the kavachomer as we just mentioned before. Shlishi l'kodesh min haTorah minalan. We both say, from where do we know a shlishi when it comes to kodesh? Dechsev v'habasar asher yiga b'chol tamei lo yochal. The pasuk says that meat, right, sacrificial meat, which will touch anything tamei, should not be consumed. What are we talking about? Milo askinan dinaga b'sheni. Are we not talking about where the sacrificial meat touched a sheni? Va'amar rachmana liyochal. And yet the Torah says you can't eat it. Now both say, if sacrificial meat touches a sheni, what does the sacrificial meat become? Becomes a shlishi. And yet the Torah says you can't eat it. So that's a pasuk that teaches me about the concept of shlishi by kodesh. Revi'i mekavachomer. Where do I learn out a revi'i from kavachomer? That's kidamar. That's kavachomer just made before. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Tam beribi eni odea. I don't know the reason of Rabbi Yossi. So the Gemara says eni odea mahu. Shari tshuvaso bitsido. Because ultimately, again, lemaisa, the stira or the contradiction or the refutation is right by its side. I will say, you know what? We'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up on this. We'll say, I promise you, this is all going to come together because also in tomorrow's shir, we're going to do an incredible Rambam, right? And the Rambam ultimately, again, actually codifies all of these categories in a very clear and succinct way. But remember, again, what we have, well, at least we have from our Mishnah, at least we have what it is that we need. That Allah Lamaisa, again, Rabbi Akiva came along and introduced us to the concept that a sheni can make a shlishi min haTorah. That's the part that we've established. Once we started down that road, then everything flows from there. I will say, shkoyach. All right, Chevron Zoom, have a great day, everyone. Thank you. I don't know. What? I could just